Do you know everything about the financial aspects of working as a GP in practice? Do you know what IR35 is? Do you know some about the resources that you can use to try and make your whole accountancy process a bit easier, and especially what you need to know as setting up as a locum? Well, in this video, we're going to talk about that. Let's tech enhance your primary care and learning. If this is the first time we're meeting, I'm Dr. Gandalf of EGP Learning, where I look at supporting you as technology-enhanced primary care. And in the coming video is an interview with myself and Jenny Fullman of Fullman & Co, where we talk about various different issues that are affecting GPs and clinicians in primary care in terms of the way that you work with regards to your finances. There's lots of changes coming and also some hints and tips on how you can make this whole process a little bit easier for yourself. The new tax year is coming, so definitely have a look at this video. As always, feel free to contact us on our various different platforms and make sure you sign up and subscribe by ringing the bell on our YouTube platform, or watch us on Facebook. All the links will always be there on Twitter. As always, contact me at EGP Learning or at Dr. Gandalf52. Shall we begin? Hi EGP learners, and welcome to this episode of the EGP Learning podcast, where we're going to have a nice chat, hopefully, with Jenny Fullman from Fullman & Co about how to improve your finances in general practice. Let's tech enhance your primary care and learning. If this is the first time we're meeting, I'm Dr. Gandalf of EGP Learning, where I look at supporting you with primary care, health tech and learning. And in today's episode, as I said, we're joined by Jenny Fullman. How are we doing, Jenny?
Good, thank you. Yep.
So I've asked Jenny to come and speak to us because one of the questions I often get on a lot of the GP forums and stuff that we have is how can I sort out my finances? Particularly as a GP, there's certain rules, regulations and important things I think to know. And yeah, I thought I'd ask an expert because I by no means am one when it comes to finance and stuff in this particular area. So tell us about the finance, Jenny.
Well, if we think primarily about people who might be qualifying as GPs soon, then there's a number of things they need to think about in terms of where they go forward and whether they go as locums or salaried or partners. Some things are general across the board. So probably the first one that we need to talk about is claiming exam fees, which still has been the case that you can do that. You can claim back your exam fees against tax. Has been the case for a couple of years now. But I still get clients coming to me for tax returns, as let's say they've started out earning money as a locum and they want to do their first tax return, and I say, have you claimed your exam fees? And they say no. So it's still happening. A lot of people are doing the claims, but some people aren't. So if you haven't done it yet, it's a relatively simple process. The form you need to download is a P87, and you can use that as long as your claim is below £2,500. If your claim is over £2,500, which sometimes it is, coupled with indemnity and subscriptions and all those other kinds of things that you can claim for as an employee, then you need to do a tax return. So you can look at those forms, have a little look, see if you're happy to do it yourself. If not, contact an accountant to make sure that you get your tax back. Which, if you're a 40% taxpayer, is not insignificant on those exam fees.
Wow. Yeah. So definitely tip one then, look at claiming back your exam fees if you haven't done so already.
Absolutely.
And easy to do if it's under £2,500.
Yeah, very easy. It's a simple form. You will need your employer's pay-as-you-earn reference, which you can get off your payslip.
Okay. And if not, have a chat with an accountant.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. If it's one of those things that frightens the life out of you filling in a tax form.
Next up.
So then we need to think about people who are perhaps going into self-employment. Let's think about locums. So the best tip I can give is that you need to register as self-employed technically within 6 weeks of starting self-employment, although there's no penalty for doing it a bit late. When you register, again, you can do it very easily online with HMRC. They will issue a unique taxpayer reference to you, which you need in order to file a tax return online. So without that, you can't do anything with your tax return, and also you won't be able to log in to your taxpayer account in order to file a self-assessment tax return.
Okay.
So make sure you do that. Don't leave it till the last minute, because it can take a couple of weeks to issue that. And then if you then need to register online to get your account login details and account number, etc., etc., if you leave it until early January and you've got to file something on the 31st of January, it will be too late.
Okay, so don't leave it till January.
No, don't.
Okay,
No.
so pretty much within a few weeks of you thinking you're going to start working as a locum.
Yeah.
Would that be the same if you're doing multiple different roles and stuff?
Yeah, potentially. So you will need to do a tax return if you do anything other than just salaried employment. So if you're going to be a GP partner, you will need to submit a tax return, which the partnership accountants will normally take care of for you.
Okay.
But just double check with them and make sure that they have registered you if you haven't already, and that everything is in hand. And yes, if you've got multiple roles, if you've got a salaried job and some locum income, you will need to submit a tax return.
Okay, cool. So first one we had was reclaim your exam fees.
Yep.
Second one, get registered with HMRC if you're self-employed in any way, shape or form.
Yep.
As soon as feasibly possible, but definitely not in January of your tax deadline. Cool.
Definitely. Yep.
Yeah.
Next one would be, again, let's talk about locums. If you're doing self-employed work, even if it's just a little bit, it's better to have a designated business bank account. Because what that means is that if you have all your locum earnings coming into that bank account and you pay your expenses out of there, it's separate from everything else. So if you get an inquiry with HMRC and they want to look at your tax records, let's say you've put all your locum earnings into your personal bank account, then even if the inquiry is just an aspect inquiry, so just looking at your sole trade, if it's all going into personal bank account, then you're instantly giving them access to extra information that is not necessary in the course of answering that inquiry in that particular time. So it's better just to have it ring fenced, so it's completely separate. You know exactly what's gone in there and what's gone out of there, and it's easy to bounce away a tax inquiry if you've got one.
Okay.
If your records are good and
would
separate.
that have to be a business bank account, or can that just be a personal account?
It can just be a personal account that you don't use for anything else. So a lot of us will have a little bank account, set to one side that we used to use and we've stopped using and we haven't got around to closing it. That would be fine. It doesn't need to be a business bank account.
Okay, cool.
Because they often charge for those.
Yeah, well, I guess that was my main reason for asking, because business accounts typically there tends to be either a monthly charge or a transactional charge that comes with it and stuff, and obviously they can rack up if you've got various different payments going in and out and that kind of stuff. So useful to know.
Yeah. Probably the next tip I would give if you are starting out as a locum or self-employed or thinking of joining a partnership is to register with an accountant sooner rather than later. Particularly important if you are thinking of joining a partnership and it's a new thing to you, you can ask your accountant to look at the practice accounts for you and just have an overview and make sure that everything looks okay, and they might be able to give you some tips about things that you need to ask for if anything looks unusual. So run them by somebody who's used to looking at GP accounts and make sure that they guide you to asking the right questions before you sign on the dotted line with a partnership to join. Make sure you're fully aware of what the practice accounts entail. You can tell quite a lot if you're used to looking at business accounts.
Okay.
If a certain expenditure line is higher than usual or lower than usual, it can tell you a little bit about the business. You know, for instance, staffing. If the staffing line looks high, or if there's the locum fee looks high for that particular type of practice, then you can start asking more detailed questions in terms of is everything stable at the practice? Have they had issues? Or,
And I guess one of the questions I sometimes get is, should you use the practice accountant to go through those kind of paperwork and side of things, or should you use a separate kind of independent kind of accountant to have a look at that?
If you're talking about a sort of health check on practice accounts before you join, it would make more sense to go to somebody who's not already connected with the practice. Although on the flip side, somebody who is already connected with the practice will know much more about them. So might be able to bounce away any things that look like anomalies but actually aren't. And I do get some partners who would prefer to have an accountant away from the partnership accountants, although equally a lot of partners will just go with the partnership accountants for ease. So it's really, you have a choice. You don't need to go with the partnership accountants if you already have an accountant, or if you'd prefer to keep it separate.
But I guess if you've got your practice accountant and you're linked with a practice, then you're potentially looking at hopefully less costs.
Potentially, yeah. A lot of accountants would roll in the fee for doing a standard partner tax return with the cost of doing the actual practice accounts, because the cost of doing an individual tax return compared to the cost of doing the partnership accounts is very minimal, really. It's not much. It might be worth checking if you've got rental properties or salaried income or locum income outside of the partnership accounts, just checking with the practice accountant before you sign up with them whether there's going to be any extra cost, because if it's a complicated tax return, it might need.
Yeah. And I guess potentially in our kind of growing world of portfolio working, that's something that we've
It's very common. It's very common.
Yeah, more often and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So we've covered claiming back your exam fees, making sure you get registered ASAP, having an accountant, and having a look at the practice accounts and that kind of stuff early on if you're interested in joining a practice and things.
I suppose the other thing which is quite topical at the moment and probably is worth mentioning, it would hopefully not be something that's critical at this stage for somebody who's starting out in their career, in the early stage of their career, but something to be aware of, and something if anybody's watching who's been in practice for a while and it's sort of 40s, 50s kind of age, pensions, hot topic at the moment.
Definitely.
Something to be aware of is that advising on pensions is a very, very tightly regulated area. So your accountant is not likely to be able to advise you on a question such as, should I be in the NHS pension or should I go and invest my pension money elsewhere? That's a very tightly regulated area, and you will need to talk to an IFA about that. But the tax charges on pensions over the last few years have got increasingly hefty, and people who are 40s, 50s kind of age are facing tax charges on something called annual allowance, which means that you are allowed to, your pension pot is allowed to grow by £40,000 a year. That includes contributions and growth. So don't think that just because you have put in £35,000, let's say, to your pension in one particular year, that you're safe, because it also looks at growth. So it's how much has your pension pot grown in one tax year compared to the other. And the other thing that people are getting stung by is the lifetime allowance as well. So again, there's allowances on how much you can contribute into a pension scheme over your lifetime. And the reason that's quite topical for doctors is that in the NHS, it's a fixed contribution. It's a fixed contribution. So you're either in or you're out. If you're in, you have to contribute a particular percentage based on your earnings.
And I guess definitely relevant for partners in particular, because they would play both the employer and the employee contributions as well, wouldn't they? So potentially quite a significant chunk of money.
That's right, So you should be able to get a statement annually from the NHS Pensions Agency, which will give you details of how much your pension has grown in each year. And that is something that I would say you should be quite aware of checking on an annual basis. So for younger doctors, hopefully it's not going to be anything you need to panic about imminently, but do just be aware how much it's growing, when you start to approach any limits in terms of tax limits, annual allowance or lifetime allowance, and make sure that you've got somebody in mind as an IFA that you can turn to for advice when it starts getting towards the time when you need to do something about it.
Sure. But I guess one thing to note at the moment, so for those trying to get those statements, actually that's a little bit challenging at times.
It can be.
So currently run by Capita, and those of you that are listening to this, around about this time of year will know that Capita may not be handling that as well as they could do. No. So that process of getting access to your pension information can be quite long and drawn out and potentially very frustrating. So definitely worth looking at now rather than later.
Don't leave it. Not think about it for
because chances are you may not get it straight away. And as you mentioned, having the advice of an IFA, so independent financial analyst, is it? Advisor, that's it, of which there's variety out there and stuff, and feel free to contact us if you're interested in any in particular.
But assuming that you've got an accountant and they are somebody who's experienced with medical, then they should be able to put you in touch with an IFA who's got experience of the NHS pension. While you're talking about Capita, the other thing to mention, which might be handy for some people, if you are anything but salaried, so locum, self-employed, partner,
Yeah.
you have to submit it's basically like a self-assessment pensions form to the NHS Pensions Agency every year to make sure that the contributions you've paid when looking at the actual earnings that you made across the year are at the right tier.
Okay.
Some people have forgotten to do that or didn't realise they had to do it. Capita last year did say that they were running an amnesty. So I think sometimes people had submitted them and they weren't dealt with properly. So the situation was in a little bit of a mess. So if you do get your pension statement and it's not showing the information that you're expecting, then go back to Capita, speak to your accountant as well, and keep badgering them until it gets updated. It's not uncommon that things will be a little bit awry. So look at the pension statement, definitely from a tax point of view, but also check it and make sure that your records are up to date. And if it looks like there's a particular year that hasn't been logged, your pension contributions haven't been logged, then take action against that. They basically look for the self-assessment form in order to update your record. So if it wasn't filed, maybe you didn't do it or they didn't log it, you need to get that logged and updated, otherwise it won't show the correct pension.
Sure. As an extra point with that, so some of you will know my other kind of hats. One is with a group called General Practice Survival, and they're currently running several campaigns to try and look into this and support people. So if you are interested in more information about that, have a look at the General Practice Survival website, where there's a section looking at pensions and a current campaign in combination with other groups like National Association of Sessional GPs and some of the LMCs and stuff to try and help GPs that are falling foul of this. Amnesty, information, Capita. Yeah.
And I think there's been other people looking at things like maternity. You know, if a lady is on maternity leave for part of the year, unfortunately, the NHS Pensions Agency have something called annual averaging. So that they will average your earnings across the year and potentially put you on a higher tier than actually you should have been compared to what you were actually earning. And that would seem on the face of it quite unfair. And I think some people are challenging that as well.
Sure.
So there's probably watch this space.
Okay, cool.
In many regards.
So the complicated world of pensions covered in about 5 minutes for you. And the long and short of that is also get some specialist financial advice with it if your situation is anything more than by the sounds of it, salaried situation. And even then, still check your paperwork and stuff.
Definitely,
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the constant questions I get is what can I claim for?
Oh, yes, that's a good one. So it's different for if you're salaried than compared to if you're self-employed. So if you're salaried, I do have a quote here from the HMRC's own employment income manual, which says, because the general rule for employee expenses is extremely restrictive, it is tempting to conclude that no expense could ever be deductible, which is quite cheerful, isn't it? But actually you can, as we've said before, you can have your exams fees, you can also have subscriptions and indemnity. They are the most common ones for employed individuals. When you're self-employed, you get a little bit more flexibility. So you can claim for courses and conferences outside of the ones that are just your core career. So when you're a GP trainee, you have to submit, you have to do your exams, you have to qualify, which is why you've got the ability to claim those exam fees. But if you just went on a course, just a general CPD update course, as an employee, that wouldn't be claimable. They would expect your employer to pay for it, which, as we know, they don't always do. As a self-employed individual, you can claim that kind of thing. You can claim a limited amount of travel. Be very careful. Typically, let's talk an average GP, it would be travel to courses and conferences and visits.
So not
pretty much that's
home
it.
to work. That's a common one that I get asked.
No, you can't. No, there was a case, if you want to look it up, Dr. Smadian a few years ago that looked at travel. And unfortunately that was not successful in terms of getting more flexibility in what you can claim. If you follow the pattern of a true locum GP, i.e. not working at the same surgery every Tuesday afternoon, for example, and you are genuinely going to different places all the time, potentially you get more flexibility then. But it would be an area that I would say the best advice I could give is be cautious and run it past your accountant. Any claim, keep a record of your mileage. Things like software like Locum Organiser has facility to keep track of your mileage, and let your accountant weed out anything which might not be allowed.
So you mentioned obviously courses,
Yep.
transport. Any other kind of big things that potentially people should be aware of that they could claim for?
Equipment, if you're buying something like a
Yeah.
new stethoscope or something like that, you can
Mhm.
claim. Books, course books,
Yep.
textbooks,
Cool.
mobile phone.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time,
Yeah.
it used to be the case, a few years ago, that you would itemise phone calls. Who does that now? You just get a package, don't you?
Yeah.
And your monthly fee allows you. So most doctors would say, I use my phone, I don't know, 60%. I'm just looking a figure out there. Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
60% of the time for business,
Mhm.
including work at home and, looking at work-related things on the internet, because it's not just phone calls, it's internet, text messages,
Okay.
anything. So on a percentage basis, how
Mhm.
much time do you use it for work versus home?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that self-employed people can claim for, speaking about home, is use of home. There's a flat rate allowance depending on how many hours a week you work from home.
Okay.
So for most doctors, they would fall into the £10 a month bracket, which is not great, really.
Okay.
But if you work from home for a significant amount of time,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of doctors would do,
Mm-hmm.
then you can look at submitting a claim based on mortgage interest, council tax,
Okay.
insurance, all your home expenses, divided by the number of rooms, and then deduct a percentage for how
Okay.
much you use that room for business versus personal.
Okay.
So again, talk through that with your accountant. Some people are concerned when we talk about that.
Mhm.
Does it mean that when I sell my house, I might be liable for a capital gain?
Yeah.
And the answer is no,
Okay.
as long as you maintain whatever room you're using for work, maintain a duality of purpose. So leave the door open, let the cats and the children come in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have it just as an office and never use it for anything else. As long
Okay.
as you do that, then you're fine.
Okay. Right.
So yeah, I think that would be most of the things. So you're
Mhm.
looking for anything that you spend in relation to your business.
Mm-hmm.
That will vary from person to person, but typically they're the common things that we see.
Sure. So we've got professional fees. So
Yep.
that'd be obviously things like your GMC,
Oh yes, subscriptions, all subscriptions.
BMA,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
RCGP.
Mhm.
That's a common one. People say
Yep.
it doesn't work out the full £500 that many people comment on. And I guess other professional subscriptions, courses. You
Yep.
mentioned obviously a big one.
Indemnity is
Indemnity,
a weighty one. Don't forget
definitely.
that.
And hopefully indemnity we'll see come down a little bit.
Hopefully,
Come
fingers
April.
crossed. Yep.
Fingers crossed.
Mhm.
But yeah, so definitely some there. What about things like so some people may go out for things like locum insurance, critical cover insurance, those kind of things. No.
Because it's not necessary for
Okay.
running your business. It's a choice to have things like
Fair
that. So yeah, life insurance is something I get asked about a lot.
Mhm.
And no, the answer is no, because you can do your business without it. It's a choice to have it.
Okay.
So
I mean, I remember one story of a GP claiming the dog food for his dog that acted as a security for his practice.
do you know you can sometimes claim
Mhm.
for guard dogs, but yeah, I would be careful, really. I did hear of a tax inspector doing an inspection on somebody, and he was disputing the fact that the taxpayer had claimed for expenses relating to this guard dog,
Mhm.
and so the taxpayer let the dog out.
Okay.
I think it was allowed.
Fair enough. Yeah, that sounds like
he was
a
a
good
bit of a
reason.
fierce dog.
Yeah.
So if you've got a Shih Tzu or something, don't bother.
Fine. Okay. And I guess the other one, accountancy fees.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Okay. So we've covered a few things there.
Mhm.
I guess, is there anything else that we feel we need to get across to people in terms of what they need to know?
I don't think so. I think they would be the critical things that I would ask people to look at as a priority.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the other thing I was hoping we could talk about as well is I'm aware that this April there's certain things that are changing in terms of how particularly practices may have to look at their finances and stuff.
Yeah, so the deadline of April, we're talking about making tax digital here, which you've hopefully heard about on the radio and various adverts that HMRC are running.
Mhm.
The deadline of April this year affects businesses that are VAT registered, so that's not going to cover a lot of medical work, because most of it falls outside the scope of VAT.
Mhm.
But making tax digital is being extended across all areas of taxation.
Mhm.
So it's certainly something that you need to be aware of, and need to be talking to your accountant about whether your practice software that you're using for your accounts at the moment is compliant,
Okay.
and actually whether it's working for you as well as it could be, because
Mhm.
there's, with the advent of making tax digital and a lot of extra software, gadgets that are offered now, the software that is available is a lot different than it was, say, 5 years ago.
Okay.
So if you haven't updated your accountancy software over the last few years, and let's face it, people don't, they kind of get it in place and chug along and everybody gets used to using it and they quite like it.
If it ain't broke, why fix it kind of thing.
Exactly,
in some way.
And it feels nice and comfortable and everybody knows what they're doing. But if you haven't looked at it for a few years, it's probably worth having a look at what's out there and how the new software could potentially work a bit smarter for you.
Mm-hmm. So I know a few of the locum companies like My Locum Manager and Locum Organizer have some of that inbuilt.
Yeah.
But I guess more formal kind of products would be things like QuickBooks,
Yeah.
Xero,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so they are relatively... QuickBooks has been on the market for a while. Xero has been around for a few years now, and they offer typically cloud-based software. So a few years ago, you used to, if you wanted to say Sage or something, you'd go to the shop or ask your accountant, you'd get a disk, you'd load it into your machine, and there it would sit, and you'd have to make sure you take backups and so on.
Yeah.
But the last few years, a lot more cloud-based software is available, and actually Sage is up to date as well, I think, in terms of the things that Xero and QuickBooks can offer. But if you haven't updated it for a few years, you're probably not aware that your accountancy software can now talk to your bank account.
Okay.
So you input your details in terms of your bank logon, and you have to go through all the security things to make sure that you are who you say you are and you've got permission to talk to the bank and so on. But once you've connected the two, your accountancy software can pull your bank statements through into it.
Okay.
Which makes life a lot easier and quicker when you're talking about
Sure.
entering your bank transactions on. You don't need to type away, the date, the description,
Wow.
the amount. It's all there. What you need to do the first time you use it is tell the software where to put the payment or the receipt or whatever. So you classify it, you go into each line, tell it where it should be within the accounting software. But then once you've done it once, it tends to recognise the transactions, so it will suggest, which is useful. Some things it won't work for, like if we're talking about a GP practice getting their global sum amount every, there's various additions and deductions to that, so you would still have to go into that line by line. But your payments, let's say to HMRC every month for your pay as you earn and NI, it would recognise that over time.
Yep.
So rather than the first time you go in, you'd have to tell it where to go. The next time it flags up on your bank feeds, it would say, suggesting putting it here, and you just click yes.
Perfect.
And it's so easy, so quick.
Yep.
So if you haven't looked at that kind of thing, and you haven't updated your accountancy software over the last few years, your practice manager may be a little bit resistant, who knows, who likes change. But it is something that could potentially save a lot of time. Yeah. And time is quite precious, isn't it?
And I guess it's like when any of those kind of system change things, it's that short-term pain for the longer-term gain.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're used to using an accounting system anyway, it's not going to be that dissimilar.
Yeah. And I guess one thing I was potentially thinking about is, even as an individual locum, there's potentially some time saving to be had when it comes down to processing and even having a kind of like a scan of what your accounts are actually, because it will categorise things into, you can set up tags for different kind of payments and that kind of stuff, so you can see where your money's going,
absolutely,
where it's coming in from.
Yep.
And I guess, would it help with the accountancy in terms of lowering costs? Because it may do a bit more of the work for them? Potentially.
Maybe. Yeah. It's worth having a chat to them and see if that would make their life easier. Even if it doesn't, I'm quite sure it would probably make the practice manager and the partner's life easier.
Fair enough.
When you think about the amount of time it takes just to get your monthly bank statement transactions loaded onto the system.
Okay.
Depends how many pages of bank statement you get a month.
Cool. I had one last question, because it's something that, again, I hear in some of the forums and stuff, and it's this whole concept of GPs working as limited companies and IR35, and it's all packaged into a lovely little ball of chaos, I think.
Yes.
I mean, any words of caution? Or
well, hopefully you've all heard of IR35, because it was quite hot over the last year, 18 months or so. IR35 has actually been in place for as long as I've been in practice, really. It's making sure that people are correctly classified as employed or self-employed. So it's not something new. The difference is that whereas previously the taxpayer could say, I could, let's pretend I'm a locum GP, I could go to my local surgery and say, I'm self-employed, I want you to pay me as self-employed, and they would go, okay. Yeah. They don't do that anymore, because the HMRC has reminded the employer that the onus is on them to get people paid correctly, it's actually always been on them.
Okay.
In terms of if you get a tax inquiry and
Sure.
HMRC say, actually, you've paid this person as self-employed and we think they should have been employed because they're turning up every Wednesday afternoon
Okay.
and every Thursday morning
Yeah.
for regular sessions, which fits the pattern of employment rather than self-employment. And we think that the payments that you've made are therefore going to be treated as net salary and we're going to gross it up. And
Okay.
you're going to be liable for the
Ouch.
extra tax and an I. It's always been the case.
Yeah.
But quite rightly, they've started to force employers to take it a little bit more seriously. And this caused a bit of panic in the NHS about a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And lots of clients were coming to me and saying, oh, well, I'm going to this practice for a locum and they've said that they want to pay me as employed, because it was a bit of a knee-jerk, oh, let's be careful and make sure we don't get it wrong. And you mentioned limited companies as well.
Yeah.
Some people are trading as limited companies, as locum GPs. However, the big thing that you lose is the ability to pension your income.
Okay.
As I said, I'm not an IFA. I can't advise on pensions. However, when I've listened to talks from IFAs in the past, I've yet to hear them say there's a better pension out there.
Okay.
For doctors. You know, if you talk about, am I in the NHS or am I going to a private pension provider? So that's a big thing. Let's say if you're 55 and you've been in the NHS pension scheme all your life, it might be a good thing, but for most people, that's going to be a disadvantage. So there are various advantages and disadvantages to trading through a limited company. For most locum GPs, I tend to say don't.
Okay.
Your accountancy fees will be higher because we've got to prepare accounts for the limited company and the directors, rather than just doing a self-assessment tax return where everything's rolled up into one. There's more work involved that way. And a few years ago, you used to be able to make tax savings by trading through a limited company versus a sole trader. But the government have brought the tax rates in line, tax and an I as a whole, if you look at it globally, for a sole trader versus somebody trading through a limited company is now much more levelled out than it used to be.
Okay.
So there's not even a tax saving to make.
Okay.
So you're paying more accountancy fees, you're not making a tax saving, and you're losing the ability to pension your income. So for that reason, on paper, for most locum GPs, I'd say don't. There are some circumstances where it can be beneficial.
And probably one to discuss with an IFA.
Exactly.
Then. Yeah.
Accountant, yeah.
Oh, accountant,
yeah.
yeah.
Definitely,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool.
In terms of whether you should be limited or sole
Okay.
trader.
So I guess just to summarise, so the points we've covered is 1, claim your exam fees if you haven't done so already.
Definitely.
2, get registered as self-employed with HMRC if you are self-employed as soon as possible.
Yep.
Yeah. 3 was obviously the various different things that you can claim for in terms of finances and that kind of stuff, particularly professional subscriptions, courses, that kind of stuff, especially if you're self-employed, and a few other things that are listed earlier. And I'll put that list down in the show notes later on. 4, we talked about IR35, limited companies and the pros and cons and that kind of stuff. And I've already forgotten 5, unfortunately.
Did you say pensions?
Pensions, yeah. How can I forget pensions? It's the big one. Yeah, definitely pensions. Have a look at things. Have a chat with your total rewards system. TRS, isn't it? I think it's called. If you can get an access to that. If not, you may have to contact Capita and that kind of stuff to get a list, and definitely speak to an IFA if it's relevant to you in terms of where you are in your career and stuff, in terms of planning, and that inevitable question of should I or should I not stay with the NHS pension that is just abound. Definitely one to ask an IFA, not to ask a group of GPs. No. Please don't. Yeah. I guess anything else that you feel we need to kind of discuss or cover, or?
I don't think so. Not off the top of my head, no.
Well, I think that's been a really good summary of what you kind of need to know in terms of finance and working in primary care as a GP, and whether that's as a practice potentially, but definitely I think as a locum and starting out and things. So let's thank Jenny Fullman for joining us.
Thank you.
You work as Fullman and Co. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah. So what's the best way for our viewers and listeners to get in contact with you if you wanted to find out more or potentially even use your services and stuff?
Normally email, which is fullmanandco@gmail.com.
Okay. And so Jenny's kind of East Midlands based, isn't it, towards Newark and stuff, so definitely in that particular area. I think great place to contact, but obviously accounts do work across
I've got
anywhere, so it doesn't matter where you are in the country.
The wonders of modern technology.
Yeah, it allows you to do so many things nowadays. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this session. Slightly different to a kind of our normal kind of content, but it's something that keeps coming up in terms of comments I've heard from colleagues and peers on the variety of groups that I'm on. So I thought definitely a session that worth looking at for you guys and stuff. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to contact either through the video or through the podcast and stuff, or on Twitter as usual at EGP Learning or at Dr. Gandalf 52. As always, the EGP Learning content is available on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and click the bell as well, so you make sure you get all the content straight away, first and foremost, that kind of thing. Any questions, feel free to contact me. Thank you for joining us, Jenny.
Thank you.
And as always, guys, subscribe, comment, share, and let's tech enhance your primary care and learning. See you later. Bye.